We're going to talk right now about Andrew Tate. There's been some developments in Andrew Tate's situation. This is from the Washington Post. Romanian prosecutors announced Tuesday that internet personality and self-described misogynist Andrew Tate and his brother have been indicted on charges of human trafficking, rape, and forming an organized crime group. I'm going to keep reading from the Post here because it's very specific, and it's useful to be precise. The indictment marks the end of a criminal investigation into Tate and two Romanian associates. As prosecutors referred the case for trial. The prosecutor's statement said the injured parties were, quote, sexually exploited by group members and forced to produce online pornography through acts of, quote, violence and mental coercion. The legal team for the Tate brothers described the move as, quote, undoubtedly predictable. They're putting forward this basically stance that they're kind of excited and eager to confront these charges because, quote, it will undoubtedly substantiate the brothers' claims of innocence. So remember, they were arrested in Romania in December. They do have dual British and American citizenship. They were moved to house arrest back in March. Prosecutors are saying that these four, Tate and his brother and the other two, formed a crime group for human trafficking in Romania, Britain, and the United States. Here's more from the prosecutors. The injured persons were recruited by the foreign nationals by misleading them about the intention to establish a marriage/cohabitation relationship and the existence of real feelings of love. That one of the suspects charged with rape in relation to two incidents back in March of 2022, so over a year ago, according to prosecutors. What do you make of it, Ryan?
You know, it's important to keep in mind the whole idea of innocent until proven guilty, but these guys look guiltier than Trump, even on the classified documents charge. You know, we'll see what evidence comes up, but we have their own testimony kind of through their videos that they do, where they talk about ways that they groom young women and traffic them basically over to Romania and then persuade them into staying and becoming basically sex slaves. Now, they're arguing that that is all done consensually. Prosecutors also have, at least 7 witnesses. And so depending on what you hear from those witnesses, if they can add even one notch to what they have already said publicly, then you have a pretty slam dunk case.
So there are messages where Tate has explained to one of the women that he used a webcam business to, quote, launder money, and that he'd been teaching men to start their own. Quote, it's all a cover, he wrote. The Washington Post said, assuring her she could trust him. He told the victim that he'd meet her in Romania after taking care of some work in Prague and spoke about the prospect of marriage. This is from a Tate message. I want to know that you are determined, serious about marriage. So all of that is
right.
is obviously like very critical to
right.
the case.
The boyfriend method.
Yes.
There's some question about if that's all it is, if it's just hideous and disgusting, or if it's a crime. I'm fine these guys getting locked up for even just what they've been saying publicly, but it does appear that it goes even beyond that. That there's the charges talk about violence. Yeah. So not just mental coercion, but also violence.
And this is going to be a real going forward, and we've already seen it happen. But the proliferation of hardcore pornography has made this a real problem for so both the proliferation of hardcore pornography and the proliferation of sort of text message-based sexual relationships and relationships in general brings this evidence in, and then the Tate brothers can claim this is consensual and that in some sense it was part of the sexual relationship to
right. But if the women claim otherwise, then they're in a lot of trouble. And it appears like that's likely that the women will claim otherwise.
Well, and that's what's so, I think, disturbing is that you can have evidence of something being, on its face problematic, and people can claim that it's consensual.
Right.
And, if that is popularized and becomes sort of normalized, it's a very serious problem for both men and women. as that kind of stuff happens in the future. It's a big problem for courts in our legal system. It's a big challenge for courts in the legal system, but it's not great for men or for women because it makes it really, really hard to get justice.
Related to this, I wanted to get your thoughts on a new piece. If you can put up this second element here, there's a tweet from my colleague Murtaza Hussein, who's sharing a new article in New Lines magazine, which is headlined "How Andrew Tate and the Far Right Made Common Cause with Islamists." Subhead: Western groups find in Muslim communities what they believe is a prototype for a social contract free of wokeism and women's liberation. Story by Rasha Al-Akidi and Lydia Wilson. I suggest people check it out. But it opens with a couple examples of things that we've all seen kind of as we've watched online culture evolve, which is dudes who started out as like proud Islamophobes, whether in post 9/11 or more recently, burning the Quran, warning of the Muslim hordes are going to take over Europe and the United States, and the Hamas is coming through the southern border, and those same not just that political tendency, but that too, but those same dudes now completely lining up with a kind of with a very conservative interpretation of Islam, and going to protests where our Quran is being burned and protesting that. Saying how dare you, and seeing in their warped vision as they describe, a prototype of a society that's free of wokeism. And the dudes over at Chapo Trap House and elsewhere have been predicting this arc.
Yeah.
That a lot of these right-wing influencers are like, why don't they just cut out the middleman and go straight to kind of far-right Islam. And here we're seeing it develop.
Yeah. Well, this is another really interesting tweet from Murtaza. He says, when I first moved to the U.S., I was actually surprised how many Muslims were sympathetic to the GOP, even in post 9/11 years, and in places like Chicago and Michigan suburbs. They were just waiting for a moment. They became 10% less hostile to return. Right. And the Michigan suburbs have been interesting, Dearborn area, because we've seen the sort of conservative Muslim communities in the Dearborn area make common cause with
right, they had that
Christians.
Pride fight recently.
Recently,
right.
The Pride fight, but also the books in schools. It was it was in the fall around an election, coming together and making a very robust protest, and I think a morally correct protest, we'd probably disagree on that, against books in schools. And then you had the American Federation of Teachers on the other side of it, siding with the schools. And it's just like, yeah, these things getting mixed up is completely fascinating and blended together. There's some talk in sort of conservative circles about the phenomenon of young men following Andrew Tate. I don't think it's Tate specific. I don't think it's Islam specific. I do think you're going to see healthier, this kind of two sides of the coin, like people's angst, especially young men's angst and anguish in this world where it's actually very difficult for young men and young women too. Like we're seeing depression rates increase. We're seeing all kinds of really bad metrics increase when it comes to mental health and physical health. Some people are going to take that out in a healthy way. Some people are going to find really unhealthy ways to channel it. And misogyny is going to be one of those ways. And I'm not saying that's affiliated with religion at all. I'm saying it's affiliated with, in this case, Andrew Tate, and that sort of version of a masculinity that's less than healthy, we'll say. Yeah. Toxic masculinity is a real thing. It's not masculinity itself, and I think that's a mistake the left often makes when they talk about toxic masculinity. They act as though masculinity is necessarily toxic. There are, of course, expressions of masculinity and femininity that can be toxic, and I think the more we see people try to find relief from the pains of living modern life, they're going to go in both unhealthy and healthy places. And Andrew Tate would be an unhealthy place.
Right. And Islam, just like Christianity, lives on a spectrum, from liberal to almost secular, all the way over to the far right. And I'm curious if the kind of if Republicans are seeing a real opening here, because it has always struck me as an odd alliance that you had so many kind of secular, borderline atheist liberals allying with explicitly conservative Muslims in ways that they would not align with explicitly conservative Christians.
Yes.
And I feel like maybe they felt comfortable making that alliance because the numbers were so small.
Yeah. That's because it was politically convenient.
Right, and they could be for pluralism as long as the conservative Muslim portion of their coalition stayed below 20% or something like that. Then pluralism's fine. if they're 50+% and have voting power, and you saw some liberals in that Michigan town saying, "Wait a minute, when we were in power, we were pluralistic. We made sure that there were ordinances that allowed for the call to prayer to happen 5 times a day. Now you're in power and you're not operating in a pluralistic way."
But what is pluralism?
They're like, well, I think pluralism is kind of like...
I don't know, because you can't have pluralism if you're saying that it's hate speech to refuse to use compelled speech, so like preferred pronouns, for instance, and disagree on what that is.
That wouldn't be pluralistic and tolerant.
Yeah, based on like our interpretation of civil rights law and where that conversation is going. So it's almost like you can't have this concept of pluralism that in the aughts made a little bit more sense. The formula made a little bit more sense when you start to have what I would argue is sort of an intolerant approach to religion, or an intolerant approach
becomes more tribal.
Yeah.
And so you try to have a coalition of tribes, those are not very stable.
This is like the biggest, deepest problem.
Coalition of interest groups is one thing. Coalition of tribes, it's only going to last so long.
Yes, that's right.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.